Hi, I'm Cheryl and welcome to the Sewing Room channel. I've made this beautiful Christmas quilt using the quilt as you go method. Now these squares that are in each section was panel fabric. Now if you want to use panel fabric, I'm going to give you at the end of the video places where you can find it. So make sure you watch this to the end so you can get that information. Also, each of the squares, I've stitched a border on it. Now, you don't have to do that. You can skip that step if you like. So I'll show you all these little simple techniques to get your quilt as you go done. So now let's get started. When you begin to cut into panel fabric, take a good look at your panel fabric before you do that. Because panel fabric is not often printed straight on the fabric. It gets stretched out of shape during the process of being wound around the cardboard on those bolts and shipped and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to cut straight down each row here. And then I'm going to go and cut down this way. So right now though, I'm just going to show you how I'm going to square one of these. So I'm going to do a quick little cut around here, and it's already very uneven that I can see. So I'm going to try to make sure that I can cut this for you. So I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch out that way. And now I'm going to try to cut straight down through this row. All right, so now I've got this piece. So most of the time you're going to have to cut one square out at a time because it's not all going to be straight. The other problem that you will have is you may not be able to have equal amounts of fabric outside of this one line here. So, but I'm going to do my best to keep it square because that's real important. On any quilt, everything must be squared. So things may zigzag to one side or the other. So I want to, let me turn my ruler over, it's upside down. I'm going to try to have 1/4 of an inch around all of the edges. But I can already tell you that's not going to happen because this block is crooked. So that's where you're going to have to struggle just a little bit. So I'm going to cut it down to maybe 8 inches so that I can try to get it as square as possible. And it is hard. But anyway, I think this is the best that I can do. So I'm going to cut this way and this way. If you don't cut all of your squares the same size, and they're all a different size, and you try to piece all of them together, it's not going to work. You're going to really struggle. So once you decide on a size, then you have to keep it that size all the time. And so, and I'm looking like it's going to be super crooked, but I think I'm going to have to go to 7.5 inches. So anyway, you're going to have to decide on one specific size and then cut it. And so as you can see, the block is a little crooked, but it is 7.5 inches. So you would continue cutting out all of your pieces. Now in my squares, it's primarily pink and red and some white, and it does have a little bit of green. So I decided to go with the green. But of the greens I wanted to use, I didn't have enough for every square to have the same color on the back. So I decided, because it's quilt as you go, who cares? So I picked multiple shades of green. So it's going to look like a scrappy patch on the back of the quilt, but this is going to go really nice. So you don't have to have all of your squares on the back the same color. I'm adding a border around each square. Now you don't have to do that, but if you've got really small squares, the fabric you're using, and you want them a little bigger, just add a border on it. and look inside of your square to see what colors are in there, and try to pick fabrics that harmonize with it or enhance that square. So I've cut 2 strips that are just a little bit longer than what I need, and because I will cut it all off so that it is an exact fit. Once you've done that, then you want to press your seams on the back side. I've already done that. Then unfold. Make sure your seams are going out and away from the center of the block, and then press that seam. Then you're going to trim this even with your square. So just place your long ruler right along the edge there, and then go ahead and trim it off. And I think I need a new cutter. And then go over to the other side and do the same thing. So now I'm going to put the last 2 strips on, and if I didn't mention earlier, my strips are 2.5 inches wide, but you can make them any width that you want. So I'm going to take my last 2, bring them front side down, line them up along the edge, and again my strips are longer than what I really need, but that's okay because you're going to trim it off. So go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam here and here. Then press both seams and make sure your seams are going out and away from the center of the block. Open the fabric up and press the seams on top, and then stitch it all even with your sides. Now here's one that I've gotten done. Now you'll notice on this one I've got 2 different fabrics. Well, in some of my squares I actually have 3. I didn't have enough of all of my different fabrics, so they all had some of the colors that were in the center, this center square here. And I was really determined to make this quilt as you go kind of my scrap quilt as you go. So I didn't buy anything new for this quilt. I just went through everything that I had, and some of my fabrics I bought a long time ago, but that doesn't matter, it's still good. The next step you want to do after you've got all of your border on, if you're doing a border, is you're going to take those squares and you're just going to lay them out on a table or on the floor, whatever you've got. Because I didn't want 2 blocks that were the same right next to each other. So I laid them out. Now I have 4 blocks in each row, and I have 5 rows. I like to make rectangular quilts, but you can make it square if you want. So I did that. Then I went and I took my fabric that's on the back, and by the way, every square on the back is a different color. So I've cut my fabric for the back 2 inches bigger than my square on top. So for instance, I think my square here was about 12 inches. I cut then my square that's for the back 14 inches, okay? And I cut cotton batting that is the same size as the square on top. So your square on top and the cotton batting are the same size. Your fabric on the bottom is 2 inches bigger. So I laid out my top squares first. Then I went and laid out a piece of backing fabric that was green. And I just made sure that I didn't have 2 greens next to each other. So then I laid that all out. Then I took the cotton batting and I took the bottom square, laid the cotton batting down, and the square on top. So I had all my rows laid out with everything that I needed. Then I just took each row and stacked it. So I had the square that's at the beginning of the row on top. And I put a little note on there that this is row 1. And then you do the same thing with the rest of them. Now I'm going to go over suggested quilting stitches. And you need to do these quilting stitches because it helps to hold everything together so it doesn't shift around and the cotton batting doesn't fall apart over time. So your quilting stitches are very, very important. So the first thing you want to do is make sure your cotton batting and your fabric on top are all lined up together. Then take those 2 pieces and center it inside of your fabric for the back. You should have 1 inch extending out past all of the edges. Then place pins to hold it all together while you do your quilting stitches. Now I'm going to just show you a few suggested patterns, and that is, here's one, it's just straight stitches. So you could do 2 or 3. If your block is this big, I would do at least 3 down going one direction, and then you would turn your fabric and do 3 rows again going the other direction. You can also use something called a serpentine stitch, and most of your computerized sewing machines have this on there. So if you're going to do a serpentine stitch, make sure you do a test stitch on some scrap fabric, because every sewing machine has their serpentine stitch set at a different length and width. So if you want it really long and not too wavy, you can lengthen your stitch and shorten up your width. So do a test stitch until you get it to look the way you want. You can also do both of these patterns also on a diagonal too. Another thing you should use is a walking presser foot. You can get those at stores that sell sewing machines. You can also buy them off of the internet, even on Amazon. There's a website called Sewing Machine Parts Online, and you can get walking feet there. Make sure you get one that is made for your sewing machine. I just finished stitching the quilting stitches on one of my blocks, and here's what my walking presser foot looks like. Okay, it's a big clunky foot. This little piece here, if you've never used one before, this goes over the screw that holds your needle in the machine. So this is where this goes. If you let it just hang free and don't do anything with it, the foot will not work correctly at all. It's not going to look right. So I did a serpentine stitch going from corner to corner. When you're doing your quilting stitches, make sure you start way out here on the edge and then stitch and finish out here on the edge. So you'll see your stitches along here. This way you don't have to worry about back stitches and threads bunching up on the back, because once you fold this all over and we bind the edges, it's not going to show. So that's why I like to go all the way out to the edge. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your first row. This is row 1, and this is my first block in row 1. I'm going to take the second block, and I'm going to bring the fabrics together like this. Alrighty, and move this over. And then line your fabrics up along the edge here, and then pin this together, and then stitch not on your quilt block, but right next to that edge there. And I would lengthen your stitch just a little bit, and also keep your walking foot on, because this is really thick now. So the walking foot's going to help you get through this. So maybe if you're at 2.0, I would at least go up to 2.5. On my machine, I keep mine at 3.0 because for me it just works better. So it's going to vary between different types of machines. Then after you've done that, you're going to take your next quilt block that's attached right after this one and do the same thing. Stitch it together, then go and take the next one and stitch them together. Now in my rows, I have 4 blocks in a row, and I'm going to have 5 rows, as if you remember that. Then at your sewing machine, at your ironing board, you're going to take it and press here, and then fold your edge in, just one. Fold it towards the edge of your quilt block. Now don't overlap it over the edge. Just fold it to where it just is slightly, it's not really touching it, just hold it back slightly and press it with your iron. And go down the entire row and do the same thing, but you're only pressing one side. Just leave this one alone for now. Then after you've done that, you're going to fold it over like this and press it. Now I'm going to show you what the next step is. Now, this one, after folding them over, stitch close to the edge all the way across. So you go across the entire row and do that. Then, when you're done with that, let me turn this a little bit. You're going to take the other side. My cameraman's probably mad at me right now because I'm all over the map. All right, then you're going to take the other edge and repeat the step. Fold it in towards the edge of your quilt block, and then fold it again and press. And then I'm going to move this here, and then stitch close to the edge right along there. And when you're done, your seam is going to look like this. So for now, in each row, you're going to stitch the blocks together in that row. So do row 1, 2, 3, 4, however many rows you have. Once you've done that, then I'll show you the next step. So here's 2 of my rows, but now I want to stitch the rows together. So both, right now, the front side of the quilt blocks are facing up, but I need to turn one of them to where the very back is facing up. So bring it up like that. And then I'm going to take the other one and bring it on top. Now, if your squares are directional, in other words, they have a specific top and a bottom, then you want to make sure that you're lining them up so that everything is going in that direction. So then match your seams. So you line it up, place pins at all your seams, and then pin it across. Then, after you've done that, you've got them all pinned, you're going to repeat the steps that you just did. So stitch close to the edge of your quilt block all the way down. After stitching the rows together, then you're going to repeat the steps how we folded the edges over and stitched them down. So fold the edge over towards the edge of your quilt block and press all the way down the full length of your quilt. And then fold it over again and press. And then stitch close to this inside folded edge all the way from side to side. Now repeat that last step. Fold the other edge over towards the edge of your quilt block and press. Then fold it over again and then press. And then stitch again close to this inside folded edge. When you're done, this is what your seams should look like. The last step is going to be I'll demonstrate how to bind the outer edges. Now it's time to cover up the outer edge raw edges, and you're going to use the same method that you did for finishing off the seams in between. I usually take the 2 longest edges first, and like I said, you fold it over once and press, and then fold it over again and press, and then stitch it down, and then go and do your 2 shorter edges to finish it off. Here is the back of the quilt. So as you can see, it's just different shades of green. There's no rhyme or reason to how it's laid out, but it really does look nice on the back. So now let's take a look at the front. I just love how this quilt turned out. Now remember, I'm using panel fabric, though these little squares with all the mice in it. It's just such a cute fabric. I wish you could still get it. But you can find panel fabric with pre-printed squares on it. So here are some places you could go to. You could look at Etsy.com, Fabric.com, and equilter.com. Joann's, I haven't really seen anything like this. I was in there recently and I didn't see anything that even resembled squares pre-printed on the fabric. Now they may have it in your local Joann's, but this is really an easy quilt. It is beautiful. Remember, start shopping now for your Christmas fabric so that you can get what you're looking for. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you learned something new about Quilt as you go. If you are a beginner and you've never done this kind of quilt before, I have one that's got a few less steps in it, and it's also Quilt as you go. So check below your YouTube screen for the link to that tutorial. I also have other beginner sewing projects if you would like to look at those also. Also make sure you follow me on Instagram and go and check out my Facebook page. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time, and happy sewing. If you like the Sewing Room channel, one of the best ways to show your support is to subscribe by clicking on that red subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to click on share to share this video with your friends. And make sure you click on the bell so you'll receive notifications for all my new videos. I'm Cheryl. This is Manny. See you next time.